Most people will never become wealthy, not because they lack talent, not because they were born into the wrong circumstances, not because the economy was against them or the timing was off, or they simply did not work hard enough. Most people will never become wealthy because they have never once stopped to examine the beliefs they carry about money, and those beliefs, invisible and unquestioned, quietly make every financial decision for them. That is the uncomfortable truth this film begins with. You are not failing because of your income. You are not stuck because of the market. You are stuck because of a framework, a mental model that was never designed to build wealth. It was designed to manage survival. And there is an enormous difference between those two things. What you are about to hear is not a shortcut. It is not a system that promises returns in 30 days. It is not a motivational speech built on borrowed energy. What you are about to hear is a set of ideas drawn from one of the most studied, most dissected, most quietly radical financial philosophies in modern history that will challenge the way you think about money at its foundation. By the time this ends, you will not just understand what Warren Buffett believed about wealth, you will understand why you think the way you do. And you will begin to see, perhaps for the first time, where your thinking is costing you more than any market crash ever could. Think about the last time you made a financial decision under pressure. Maybe the market dropped and you panicked and sold. Maybe you saw a colleague buy something expensive and you felt the quiet pull of comparison. Maybe you got a raise and within 6 months your lifestyle had expanded to absorb every dollar of it, leaving you no richer than before. These are not random events. These are patterns, and they are patterns that repeat across millions of people, regardless of income level, regardless of education. Regardless of geography, the psychology of financial failure is remarkably consistent. It begins with emotion. Human beings are not naturally rational about money. We are tribal, reactive, and status-driven. We feel losses twice as sharply as we feel equivalent gains. We make decisions based on what feels true right now, rather than what the evidence suggests will be true over time. We confuse motion with progress, activity with wisdom, and speed with intelligence. When the market rises, people feel like geniuses. They start to believe that their recent gains are evidence of their insight, rather than the natural movement of a rising tide. So they take more risk than is warranted. They stop asking hard questions, they stop reading the fine print, and when the tide goes out, as it always does, they discover painfully how much of what they built was borrowed confidence. When the market falls, the same people do something even more damaging. They sell, not because the underlying value of what they own has changed, but because the price has changed, and because the noise around them, the headlines, the experts, the fear in the voices of friends, tells them that selling is the wise, protective thing to do. This is how people lose, not in one dramatic moment, in 1,000 small capitulations to emotion dressed up as logic. And then there is the employee trap. This is perhaps the most seductive and least examined structure of modern financial life. You go to school to get good grades, so that you can earn a good income, so that you can afford a good life. Every step of that system is designed to turn you into a reliable, predictable producer of someone else's wealth. That is not cynicism, that is structure. And structure is not evil, it is simply the operating system that most of us inherit without ever choosing it. The problem is not having a job. The problem is believing that a job is a wealth-building strategy. A job is an income-generating strategy. Income and wealth are not the same thing. Income is what you earn. Wealth is what you keep, grow, and protect over time. Most people convert income into lifestyle, leaving nothing to compound, nothing to grow, nothing to work for them while they sleep. Lifestyle inflation is the silent wealth killer that no one talks about with the seriousness it deserves. Every time your income rises, the world offers you a slightly more expensive version of everything you already have. A slightly larger home, a slightly newer car, a slightly better vacation, a slightly more prestigious wardrobe. And each of these upgrades feels earned. They feel like the natural reward for hard work. But each upgrade is also a reduction in the gap between what you earn and what you spend. And it is precisely that gap, that distance between income and expenditure, where wealth is born. Narrow the gap and you narrow your future. Protect the gap fiercely and you give yourself the raw material for something transformative. And underneath all of this, woven through every bad financial decision, is short-term thinking. Short-term thinking is not just a bad habit. It is a gravitational force. It pulls constantly, invisibly, invisibly and relentlessly toward the immediate reward, the immediate relief, the immediate signal of status. Resisting it requires not just willpower, but a completely different relationship with time. Most people think in weeks. A few think in years. The rare person who thinks in decades, who genuinely restructures their behavior around a 10 or 20-year horizon, operates in a different financial universe than everyone else. That shift in time horizon is the beginning of everything. Warren Buffett did not build one of the greatest investment records in history through secret information or extraordinary access. He built it through the application of a set of principles so simple they can be stated clearly in a few sentences, and so difficult to execute that almost no one actually does. The core of his philosophy is this: find something of genuine value, pay a fair price for it, and then have the patience and conviction to hold it while the rest of the world changes its mind repeatedly. That sounds almost elementary, and it is. The insight itself is not complicated. What is complicated, what is in fact almost psychologically unbearable for most people, is the sustained discipline required to act on it consistently over time. Consider what it means to hold a position through a 30% drawdown. This is not an abstract exercise. A 30% drop in the value of something you own is visceral. It keeps you awake at night. It invites the voices of doubt in. It surrounds you with people who say confidently that things are different this time and that you should get out before it gets worse. The rational mind knows that price and value are not always the same thing. The emotional mind feels only the price. Buffett's philosophy demands that you become fluent in value, not price, but value. The price of something is what the market says it is worth today. The value of something is what it is genuine. Easily worth based on its fundamentals, its earning power, its competitive position, its management, and its long-term trajectory. Markets are efficient in the long run, but irrational in the short run. Prices move constantly in response to news, sentiment, fear, and greed. Value moves slowly in response to actual business performance. The gap between price and value is where opportunity lives, and exploiting that gap requires a clarity of thinking that cannot coexist with emotional reactivity. This is the first and most foundational lesson. You must learn to separate the signal from the noise. The signal is the underlying reality of what you own. The noise is everything the market says about it on any given day. Most investors spend 90% of their attention on the noise. The rare investor who keeps their eyes fixed on the signal builds wealth that is not subject to the emotional weather of the moment. Learning to separate signal from noise requires deliberate practice. It requires reading deeply about the businesses or assets you invest in. It requires developing a point of view that is your own, not borrowed from commentators or inherited from the mood of the market. It requires being able to sit with uncertainty without being governed by it, and it requires the kind of intellectual honesty that most people find deeply uncomfortable. The honesty to say, I do not know what the market will do next week, next month, or even next year, but I know what this thing is worth. And I know that price and value tend to converge over time. The second lesson is one that most people encounter, but few genuinely internalize. The power of compounding is not just mathematical. It is philosophical. Compounding is, at its essence, the idea that growth builds upon itself, that returns generate returns, that time, if you give it enough room, becomes your most powerful ally, the mat. Thematics of compounding are well known. What is less understood is the psychological discipline required to let compounding work. Compounding requires you not to touch the principal. It requires you to reinvest rather than extract. It requires you to resist the temptation to celebrate early wins by spending them. It requires you to stay in the game long enough for the curve to become exponential rather than linear. Most people do not let compounding work because they interrupt it. They take money out when they need it. They sell when the market drops and buy back in when confidence returns, which typically means selling low and buying high, the opposite of what they intend. They redirect gains toward consumption rather than reinvestment. Think of it this way. $1 that you invest at 25 years old has an entirely different destiny than $1 invested at 45. Not because the dollar is different, but because time is different. The first dollar has 20 more years to compound. 20 more years of returns generating returns. This is not a small difference. Over long time horizons, it is the difference between financial independence and financial anxiety. The philosophy here is patience, not passive resignation, but active, informed, disciplined patience. The patience to let a good decision be good over the time it takes to be good. The patience to not need the answer tomorrow when the answer will reveal itself clearly in 10 years. Buffett's career is built on this patience, not on finding the perfect entry point, not on timing the market, on finding something genuinely worth owning, buying it at a fair or better price, and trusting the underlying value to express itself over time. The market, he has suggested through his actions more than his words, is a mechanism for transferring wealth from the impatient to the patient. The third lesson, cons ends the quality of what you own. There is a significant difference between something that is cheap and something that is undervalued. Cheap means the price is low. Undervalued means the price is low relative to what the thing is genuinely worth. The first is a characteristic of the price. The second is a judgment about the relationship between price and reality. Buffett's philosophy evolved over time from buying cheap businesses to buying exceptional businesses at reasonable prices. This evolution reflects a deepening understanding of what drives long-term value. The most important element he identified was what he called the economic moat, the sustainable competitive advantage that allows a business to defend its position and its profitability against competitors over time. A business with a wide moat does not just perform well in favorable conditions. It performs consistently, predictably, year after year, because something about its structure, its brand, its technology, its network effects, its cost advantage makes it genuinely difficult for competitors to displace. That consistency over decades produces returns that dwarf those of any short-term trade. In personal financial terms, this principle translates to a powerful question: am I building or buying something with durable value? Or am I chasing something whose attractiveness is entirely contingent on present conditions? The investments that last are the ones grounded in something real. Real earnings, real competitive advantage, real management quality, real relevance to human behavior over the long term. These are not glamorous investments often. They are not the ones that dominate financial news. They are the ones that quietly, stubbornly, persistently create value while the noise of the market churns around them. The fourth lesson is about the relationship between knowledge and conviction. One of the most underappreciated principles in Buffett's philosophy is the concept of staying within what he calls the circle of competence. This means investing deeply in what you genuinely understand and having the intellectual honesty to walk away from what you do not. In an era of infinite information and infinite opportunity, this kind of restraint feels almost counterintuitive. Surely more knowledge means more opportunity. Surely staying in a narrow lane means leaving gains on the table. But this misunderstands the nature of conviction. Conviction is not certainty. Conviction is the earned confidence that comes from deep understanding. When you understand something well, its business model, its competitive landscape, its risks, its management philosophy, its historical behavior through different economic cycles, you can hold it through volatility without being rattled, because you are not relying on the market's judgment of it. You are relying on your own. Most investors have shallow positions in many things. They know a little about everything they own and are genuinely confident about nothing. The result is that their decision-making is always downstream of sentiment. They buy what feels good and sell what feels bad, because they have no independent basis for judgment. The investor who goes deep into a small number of things, who understands them with genuine thoroughness, is capable of something the broad, shallow investor cannot do. They can be rationally greedy when others are fearful. They can buy when prices fall because they know, not hope, not believe, but know that the price does not reflect the value. This is the intellectual foundation of contrarian investing. Not contrarianism for its own sake, not the perverse satisfaction of going against the crowd, but the calm, evidence-based willingness to hold a different position than the market when your understanding of value justifies it. The fifth lesson brings everything together. It is about the architecture of financial life. All of the principles discussed here, separating signal from noise, trusting, compounding, seeking durable value, cultivating deep conviction, are meaningless without a structure that makes them actionable. That structure begins with the commitment to live below your means, not dramatically, not self-deprivingly, but consistently, to protect the gap between what you earn and what you spend as though that gap is your most valuable asset. Because it is. It is the raw material of everything else. Then it requires the habit of investing that gap consistently. Not when the timing feels right. Not when the market looks good. Consistently, methodically, regardless of noise. Because the investor who puts money to work through every market condition in the peaks and the valleys captures more of the long-term growth than the investor who tries to time their entry. Then it requires reviewing your investments not as prices, but as businesses or assets with underlying value. Asking not what did this do this month, but what is this worth? Is it still worth owning? And is my thesis still intact? And then, this is the part that most people find hardest. It requires doing almost nothing. Watching, waiting, not reacting, not adjusting, not optimizing every quarter based on recent performance. Trusting the process, trusting the time. This is the architecture that Buffett built over 7 decades. Not a complicated architecture, not a secret one that almost anyone could implement if they were willing to commit to the principles underneath it. The reason few do is not a lack of information, it is a lack of conviction, and conviction can only come from doing the work, the deep, unglamorous, patient work of understanding what you own and why. Now imagine a different version of yourself. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Imagine that 5 years ago you made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a life-upending sacrifice, a quiet decision to begin thinking differently about money, to start reacting emotionally to market movement, to start investing in things you genuinely understood, to protect the gap between your income and your spending, to stop letting lifestyle inflation absorb every raise, every bonus, every windfall. Imagine that you made that decision and then you did something most people cannot do. You stayed with it. Through the corrections, through the headlines, through the friends who thought you were too conservative, too patient, too slow, through the moments when a flashier strategy seemed to be working for someone else. What does your financial life look like in that scenario? Not because you found a secret formula, not because you got lucky, but because you allowed compounding to work, because you bought genuine value and held it, because you did not interrupt the process every time your emotions spiked. The numbers over 10 years are not incremental. They are transformational. The gap between the person who invests consistently and the person who invests inconsistently, or not at all, does not widen linearly. It widens exponentially. And that exponential widening is not a mathematical abstraction. It is the difference between having options and not having options, between financial independence and financial dependency, between owning your time and renting it. This is what wealth actually buys, not status, not objects, not a particular income level. Wealth buys you the ability to say no to things that are wrong for you. It buys you the freedom to work on what matters, live where you want to live, take care of the people you love, and move through the world with a steadiness that is simply not available to people who live in financial anxiety. That steadiness, that quiet, unshakable sense of financial security is worth more than any car, any vacation, any luxury item that lifestyle inflation might offer you along the way. And the remarkable thing is that it is available to almost anyone who is willing to change the framework. Not the income, not the job, not the luck, the framework. The $1 million mindset shift is not about a number. The number is a symbol. It is a symbol for the point at which your money begins to work harder than you do. The point at which the compounding curve lifts you above the gravitational pull of living paycheck to paycheck. The point at which you begin for the first time to experience the real freedom that financial discipline creates. Getting there is not a matter of finding the right investment at the right time. It is a matter of thinking differently consistently for long enough that the cumulative effect of those decisions builds something significant. The shift begins with a question. Not what should I buy today, not what is the market going to do this quarter, but a deeper question. The question that serious investors ask themselves before every decision. What is this actually worth? Do I genuinely understand it? Am I paying a price that makes sense relative to that value? And am I prepared to hold this through the noise? If you can answer those questions clearly and honestly, you are operating with a different quality of thinking than most. Not because the questions are brilliant, because the discipline of asking them every time, without exception, regardless of pressure or excitement, is rare. Rarity in markets is rewarded. Not immediately, not predictably, but over time, with a consistency that is as close to a guarantee as the financial world offers. This is the last thing worth saying. Nothing in this video will change your financial life on its own. Ideas do not compound. Action does. The decision to begin to actually change how you save, how you invest, how you think about value and time and patience, that decision, made today and honored over years, is the only thing that actually works. Buffett did not build what he built by knowing more than everyone else. He built it by being more disciplined, more patient, and more honest with himself than almost anyone else. The knowledge was available, the philosophy was learnable, the discipline was chosen. You can choose it too. Not tomorrow, not when the timing is right, not when the market stabilizes or the economy improves or the conditions feel safer. Today, with the income you have now, with the knowledge you can begin building now, with the fraction of discipline you can commit to right now. The best time to start thinking this way was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. If this way of thinking resonates with you, if something in what you have heard today shifted something in you, subscribe to this channel. Not because this channel needs the number, but because staying close to these ideas, returning to them regularly, is part of the practice. Changing a financial mindset is not a one-time event. It is a sustained commitment to thinking clearly in a world that profits from your confusion. Sit with what you have heard. Write down one thing you will do differently, one habit you will begin, one belief about money you are willing to question. That is how it starts. Not with a windfall, not with a revelation, with one clear, honest, patient decision, and then another, and then another. For as long as it takes,